Hi everyone, Helen Blunden here. Hope you're happy, healthy and well. In today's life lesson and book review, I put my Pride and Prejudice aside and share the lessons I learnt in Jane Austen's book of the same name called Pride and Prejudice. Now this book was written in 1813 and it is a book that I have kept well away from. After reading this book, I realised how wrong I was about Jane Austen. You're probably thinking, oh my God, Helen, you read such great books. You read literature. Why haven't you ever got into Jane Austen? I mean, what has she done to you? Well, she didn't do anything. I just mistakenly assumed that she only wrote about young women interested in society balls and getting married to young rich blokes. In particular, when you read first sentences like this, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Now, when you read that sentence, I even highlighted it, I mistakenly assumed that all of Jane Austen's books are going to be about the fact of young women wanting to get married, all about the small town gossip between their mothers or their relatives, between rich people, poor people, whatever, yada, yada, yada. I thought to myself, you know what? I had this growing up as a kid in kind of like a very typical traditional Greek family. Well, it didn't happen to me directly because I kind of defied the odds, but it did happen obviously to extended family where what they talk about is that these things exactly. Who's going to marry who, how much money they make, what family they come from, you know, whether they're going to be rich enough that the woman can actually stop work and become a housewife. Now, why would I want to read that when you have experienced that in your life? Again, I didn't experience it personally because I obliterated the stereotype. But anyway, that's another story. Do you see my drift? I mistakenly thought that by putting my own situation and my own things that I grew up with, like I really didn't want to read about a book on similar topics because I felt to myself that it just wasn't right for me and I would have zero interest in it. But I must admit, after reading Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, which I loved so much, I thought to myself, maybe I was wrong with Jane Austen. Maybe I was wrong with female writers at this time. And I started to really sit and think deeply about my own assumptions and challenging my own assumptions. And I thought to myself, these are women who were in very difficult times. They didn't have the freedoms and the choices that we have nowadays. So obviously their choices were limited. Maybe the only thing they had to do in order to have a good life was to marry rich. And so when I started to think that way and started to continue reading this book and putting my own judgments aside, putting my own assumptions and my own aside, I started liking this book. And in fact, I loved how it was written. Most of all, I loved the character of Elizabeth Bennett and I loved the way that she approached her life, the way that she thought, the way that she mingled with other people and the way that she spoke to other people. That sarcastic wit and the use of language that really at the top level meant one thing, but underneath there was just turmoil of meaning and depth to it.
Because we're doing our best to find a fault in you.
Maybe it's that I find it hard to forgive the follies and vices of others, or their offences against me. My good opinion once lost is lost forever.
Dear, I cannot tease you about that. What a shame, for I dearly love to laugh.
That it was up to us to try and discern exactly what she was saying. And then by us then realizing, oh shit, that was very deep and boy, did that cut. You start to think, my God, there's something that we have lost in language by speaking to other people. And in some way I thought to myself, I wish I was like Elizabeth Bennett. I wish I had that gift of the gab. I wish I was able to have quick and witty comebacks to people who irritate me or say the wrong things to me. Most of the time, I am Mr. Darcy.
I was just writing a letter to my sister Jane in London, that is all.
Oh.
I sit there stunned and unable to string a sentence together. Meanwhile, the people around me, the Elizabeth Bennets of this world, can move around freely and say what they think, and I think to myself afterwards, crap, I should have said that. So I really loved this book. I loved how it was written because it quashed my assumptions about females at the time. When I read about the character of Mrs. Bennet, even though she comes across as a bit uncouth and a bit of a busybody, and she starts gossip, or she really wants to have her daughters marry, I start to empathize with her in some way, because now I understand that really in order for her and her daughters to have a good life, that they are really in the hands of brothers, sons and husbands in order to do that. Obviously that doesn't happen nowadays, but back then it did. By understanding and reading the life of women in this situation and at this time, I was a little bit more empathetic to the situation that Jane Austen wrote about. Even the things about the reputation tarring of Lydia running out with a Wickham, and how that it would impact the family and then impact obviously the lives of the other women because of this small town gossip as to the loss of rank and place in society. These are all the things now I understand by reading Jane Austen. I really loved her language, even though at times it was difficult. For those who would find it difficult, I would say one of the ways I overcame that was to read it aloud. And by reading it aloud, you start to get into the gist of what they were saying. Because after all, don't forget, they're saying it at a superficial, at a surface level, but there's a whole heap of depth and understanding and meaning that you really have to kind of decipher to really understand what their true intention is when they're actually talking to someone. The characters themselves, I love them all because they are kind of typical characters that we would find in our normal everyday life. I felt as if I was Mr. Darcy. I feel as if I'm Mr. Darcy in my normal everyday life, because there are times where I'm unable to express myself, and it's the reason why I started videoing many years ago in order to be able to string a sentence together. I seem to express myself more by writing than by talking to camera or talking to others. I get my words mixed up. So in some way I feel like I'm Mr. Darcy. When I'm in a situation where I have to argue or counter a point or whatever, I wish I was like Elizabeth Bennett, who can actually have those sarcastic and witty comebacks and that kind of cut to the core of the meaning of the topic that is being discussed. Most of the time I would walk away and I would think, oh shit, I should have said this. But then of course we also meet characters in our life like Elizabeth Bennet's father, those wry, very well-meaning people in our lives, the ones that we love and adore. We also meet people like her mother, the gossip starters, and the people who want to get involved in your business even though they have no business in it, or people who really come across as irritating, but at the same time when you sit down and you talk to them and you understand exactly what their meaning is and why they're doing it, you start to empathize with their actions and their behaviors. And then of course there are the characters like Mr. Collins, and boy have I had Mr. Collins in my life. Pretty much my whole corporate life was filled with Mr. Collins characters of doing what's right or what's wrong, or having well-meaning, people in your life who say that they're well-meaning for you, but in actual fact they put you down in ways, or they make you feel bad about the behaviours and the actions that you've taken.
May I ask whether these pleasing attentions proceed from the impulse of the moment, or are they the result of previous study?
We've all met people like the characters in Pride and Prejudice. So for me, I really loved this book, and now I'm starting to think that I'm going to buy Jane Austen's books and have them in my own library, so my own Jane Austen collection, along with the Brontes, along with Orwell, along with Hemingway. Who else? Graham Greene. I mean, there's a few. And I think that it'll be a book that I would love to read again, simply because I just loved the language. I loved how the characters all came alive. I love the situations they got themselves into. I love the Elizabeth Bennett character. That is my life lessons. Thank you, Jane Austen, for quashing my stupid assumption about these books and these topics. You know, at times it felt as if I was reading a gossip, like I'm reading the book, and I felt bad reading it because it was like reading gossip. But then I thought, oh my God, just go with the flow, Helen. Enjoy it for what it is. Enjoy and just pretend and suck yourself into this society and just go with the flow. Be like Elizabeth Bennett. I don't know. That's it. Thank you for listening and thank you for watching. Bye for now.